The fluorescent lights of Westfield Premium Mall cast their harsh glare across the polished marble floors as I walked through the corridors I had once called home. Not literally, of course, but this place had been my sanctuary, my proving ground, my entire world for 3 years. Now, as I clutched the termination letter in my trembling hands, it felt more like a mausoleum of broken dreams. My name is Sarah Chen, and until 20 minutes ago, I was the assistant manager of Luxe Boutique, the crown jewel of this upscale shopping center. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was being escorted out by the same security guards who used to greet me with warm smiles and friendly waves every morning. Now they avoided my eyes, their faces masks of professional indifference. "I'm sorry it had to come to this, Sarah," said Marcus Wellington, the mall's general manager, his voice dripping with false sympathy. According to YouTube analytics, 99% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. His perfectly pressed suit and slicked back hair made him look more like a corporate shark than the mentor I had once believed him to be. But when customers complain about incidents, well, we have to take action. Incidents. The word burned in my throat like acid. 3 months ago, there had been an altercation with Mrs. Pemberton, one of our most demanding customers. She had insisted that a designer dress she'd worn to multiple events could be returned for a full refund, despite clear stains and alterations. When I politely explained our return policy, she had exploded into a racist tirade that left me shaking and several other customers uncomfortable. I had handled it professionally, calmly, even as she hurled slurs at my heritage and demanded to speak to someone who actually belongs in this country. The other customers had witnessed her behavior, some even recording it on their phones. I thought truth and dignity would be enough. I was wrong. Mrs. Pemberton's husband happened to be a major investor in the mall's parent company. Within a week, the story had been twisted beyond recognition. Suddenly, I was the one who had been rude, unprofessional, and embarrassing to the establishment. Security footage mysteriously became unavailable due to technical difficulties. The customers who had witnessed the truth seemed to have developed collective amnesia when questioned by management. "Sarah, you have to understand," continued Vanessa Rodriguez, the boutique's owner, her manicured nails drumming against her Louis Vuitton handbag. "We can't have employees who create drama. It's bad for business, bad for our image. Surely you understand." I understood perfectly. I understood that my 3 years of perfect performance reviews, my customer service awards, my 60-hour work weeks during holiday seasons meant nothing when weighed against the complaints of wealthy bigots. I understood that being the daughter of immigrants, no matter how hard I worked or how much I achieved, would always make me expendable in their eyes. "Of course," I replied quietly, my voice steady despite the storm raging in my chest. "I understand completely." Marcus exchanged a glance with Vanessa, perhaps expecting more of a fight, more drama they could use to justify their decision. But I had learned dignity from my parents, who had built their small restaurant from nothing while enduring worse treatment than this. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. As we passed the central court, I noticed a small crowd had gathered. Word traveled fast in the insular world of mall employees. I caught sight of Jennifer from the jewelry store, her face a mixture of sympathy and relief that it wasn't her. Brad from the electronics shop just smirked, probably thinking this was what I deserved for acting above my station, as he'd once put it. But it was the group near the food court that made my stomach clench with betrayal. These were people I had considered friends, colleagues I had helped during their own difficult times. Monica from cosmetics, whom I had covered for during her messy divorce. Tyler from the shoe store, whose college textbooks I had helped him afford when his hours were cut. Emma from the coffee shop, who had cried on my shoulder when her grandmother died. They stood in a loose circle, their voices carrying across the echoing space with the particular malicious glee that people reserve for others' misfortunes. "I always knew she thought she was better than us," Monica was saying, loud enough for me to hear. "With her college degree and her fancy vocabulary, this is what happens when you get too big for your britches." "Right?" Tyler chimed in, his voice carrying the same tone he used when complaining about difficult customers, acting all high and mighty, like she was management material or something. "Girl, you work retail like the rest of us." Emma's laugh was the cruelest cut of all. "Remember how she used to talk about opening her own boutique someday, as if someone like her could ever afford something like that. Guess she'll be lucky to find another job folding clothes at Target now. Their laughter followed me like a pack of hyenas, each cackle a small knife between my shoulder blades. These people, whom I had helped, supported, and considered family, were now celebrating my downfall as if it were entertainment. Marcus cleared his throat impatiently. Sarah, we really need to move this along. Security will escort you to collect your personal items and then to your car. I nodded, not trusting my voice. As we walked toward Luxe Boutique, I passed the storefronts that had been my second home, the crystal chandeliers of the jewelry store where I had helped customers find engagement rings, the mannequins in the department store windows that I had often helped dress during late-night restocking sessions, the coffee shop where I had grabbed countless lattes during 16-hour Black Friday shifts. Each step felt like a small death, but I kept my spine straight and my chin up. My parents had taught me that dignity was something no one could take from you unless you let them. At Luxe Boutique, Vanessa supervised as I packed my few personal items into a cardboard box. A photo of my parents at their restaurant's grand opening, a small succulent that had lived on my desk for 2 years, a coffee mug with World's Best Assistant Manager that my team had given me last Christmas, back when they had been my team, before corporate politics turned them against me. I'll need your employee ID, store keys, and parking pass, Vanessa said, her voice now purely businesslike. Gone was any pretense of friendship or regret. I handed them over without a word, watching as she immediately began removing my name from the duty roster posted behind the register, erasing 3 years of my life with a few swipes of whiteout. The security guards, Johnson and Davis, flanked me as we walked toward the employee exit. I had brought both of them coffee on cold winter mornings, had asked about their families, their kids' soccer games, their wives' health problems. Now they walked me out like I was a common criminal. Sorry about this, Sarah, Johnson mumbled as we reached the door. You know it's just business. Just business. Everything was just business until it happened to you. The parking lot was nearly empty in the mid-afternoon lull. My old Honda Civic looked small and tired next to the BMWs and Mercedes that filled the premium spots near the main entrance. As I loaded my box into the back seat, I could see faces pressed against the windows of the second-floor offices. Mall management, store owners, assistant managers, all watching my walk of shame with the morbid fascination usually reserved for car accidents. I sat in my car for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, breathing slowly and deliberately. The letter of termination lay on the passenger seat like a death certificate. Violation of customer service standards and conduct unbecoming of mall personnel were the official reasons. The real reason, standing up for myself against racism, would never appear in any official document. Through my windshield, I could see the gleaming facade of Westfield Premium Mall, the place that had promised to be my stepping stone to bigger things. My chance to prove that a girl from an immigrant family could succeed in the world of high-end retail. Instead, it had become the place where I learned that hard work and integrity were luxuries that people like me couldn't afford. But as I started my car and pulled out of the parking lot, I made myself a promise. This wasn't the end of my story. This was just the end of a chapter I would rather forget. I drove home to my tiny studio apartment, the one I had been saving to move out of once I got promoted to manager. The promotion that would now never come. My parents' restaurant was only a few blocks away, and for a moment, I considered stopping by to tell them what had happened. But I couldn't bear to see the disappointment in their eyes, or worse, the resignation. They had faced so much discrimination in their own lives that they might just nod and tell me this was the way of the world. Instead, I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, set my box of personal items on my kitchen table, and allowed myself exactly 10 minutes to cry, 10 minutes to feel sorry for myself, to rage at the unfairness of it all, to grieve the future I had planned. Then I wiped my eyes, made a cup of tea, and opened my laptop. If they thought losing this job would break me, they were about to learn how wrong they could be. The next few months were a blur of rejection letters, condescending interviews, and bills that piled up faster than my dwindling savings could handle. The retail world was smaller than people realized, and word of my difficult reputation had spread faster than a virus. Store managers would seem interested in my experience and qualifications until they made a few phone calls. Then suddenly positions were filled, budgets were frozen, or they were looking for someone with a different cultural fit. I took a job at a discount clothing store across town, making barely above minimum wage folding t-shirts and dealing with customers who treated me like furniture. My college degree in business management might as well have been toilet paper for all the good it did me. The manager, a woman half my age with none of my experience, delighted in giving me the most menial tasks and reminding me that I was lucky to have any job at all. But I kept working, kept saving, kept planning. During my lunch breaks, I studied market reports and demographic data. In the evenings, I researched commercial real estate, business loans, and retail trends. On weekends, I drove around the city looking at empty storefronts and imagining possibilities. My parents watched this transformation with a mixture of pride and concern. My father, who had built his restaurant from a single food cart, recognized the hunger in my eyes. My mother, who had faced her own share of discrimination as a young immigrant, worried that I was setting myself up for another fall. "Sarah," she said one evening as we shared dinner at their restaurant after closing time, "maybe it's time to think about something more stable. Your cousin Lisa is doing well in accounting. Maybe—" "No, Mom." My voice was gentle but firm. "This is what I want to do. What I need to do." She sighed, the sound carrying decades of hard-won wisdom about the price of dreams in an unwelcoming world. "Just be careful, my daughter. Sometimes the mountain is too high to climb alone." But I wasn't planning to climb alone. I was planning to move the mountain. 2 years passed. 2 years of working at jobs that were beneath my qualifications, living in the same tiny apartment, driving the same old car, but also 2 years of learning, planning, and slowly, carefully building something bigger than myself. I had started small, selling vintage and custom-altered clothing online from my apartment. My business classes and retail experience gave me an edge over other sellers, and I quickly built a reputation for quality and customer service. The profits were small at first, but they added up. More importantly, I was building a customer base and learning the ins and outs of independent retail. Social media became my best friend and greatest teacher. I studied how successful boutique owners marketed themselves, how they built communities around their brands, how they turned customers into advocates. I learned about dropshipping, wholesale buying, and inventory management from YouTube videos and online forums, but the real breakthrough came when I discovered that the lease on a small storefront in the trendy downtown district was becoming available. The space was tiny, barely 800 square feet, but it was in the perfect location. Young professionals, artists, college students, my target demographic walked past every day. The problem was the deposit. Even with 2 years of savings, I was still short of what I needed. That's when I swallowed my pride and approached my parents. "We believe in you," my father said simply, sliding a bank check across the table. It represented their life savings, money they had planned to use for their own retirement. "But more than that, we believe in justice. Show them what you're made of." On a crisp autumn morning, I signed the lease for Shen Boutique, a name that honored my heritage, rather than hiding from it. The space needed work, new paint, better lighting, fixture installation, but it had good bones and unlimited potential. I spent the next month transforming the empty shell into my vision. I painted the walls myself in warm, welcoming colors. I installed track lighting that showcased merchandise beautifully. I built custom displays from reclaimed wood and industrial pipes. Every dollar was accounted for, every decision strategic. But the real magic happened when I started curating inventory. Instead of chasing fast fashion trends, I focused on timeless pieces from emerging designers, many of them women of color and immigrants like myself. I sought out brands with ethical manufacturing practices and sustainable materials. My boutique would stand for something more than just profit. The grand opening was modest, just a few dozen people, mostly friends, family, and neighboring business owners. But the local arts and culture blogger showed up, and her Instagram post about a hidden gem in the downtown district brought in a steady stream of curious shoppers. Within 6 months, Chen Boutique had developed a loyal following. Customers didn't just come to buy clothes, they came to discover new designers, to support ethical fashion, to be part of a community that valued authenticity over pretension. I remembered every customer's name, their preferences, their stories. This was retail the way it should be: personal, meaningful, transformative. But I had bigger dreams than one small boutique. I started researching expansion opportunities, looking for the perfect location to open a second store. That's when I learned something interesting about Westfield Premium Mall. The mall was struggling. Online shopping and changing consumer habits had hit high-end retail particularly hard, and Westfield was no exception. Several anchor stores had closed, leaving vast empty spaces that the management company was desperate to fill. Foot traffic was down, sales were declining, and rumors of bankruptcy were becoming harder to ignore. Marcus Wellington had been quietly laid off 6 months earlier, a victim of corporate downsizing. Vanessa's Luxe Boutique had closed after she defaulted on her lease, apparently having spent more money on maintaining her lifestyle than on maintaining her business. Many of the employees who had mocked my departure were now unemployed themselves, victims of the mall's slow-motion collapse. The poetic justice was almost too perfect to be real, but I wasn't interested in revenge. I was interested in opportunity. Through my commercial real estate contacts, I learned that the mall's parent company was actively seeking buyers for the entire property. The asking price had dropped 3 times in the past year, but there were still no serious offers. The location was good, the infrastructure was solid, but the reputation was toxic and the debt load was substantial. Most investors saw a sinking ship. I saw a chance to build something unprecedented. The next year was a whirlwind of business plans, investor meetings, and financial negotiations. I partnered with a group of forward-thinking investors who shared my vision of transforming the traditional mall model. Instead of chasing the same high-end retailers that were struggling everywhere, we would create something different, a community-centered marketplace that combined retail with experiences, services, and social spaces. The proposal was radical. Convert half the mall into flexible spaces for local entrepreneurs, artists, and small business owners. Add a food hall featuring cuisines from around the world, not just fast food chains. Create co-working spaces, event venues, and community meeting rooms. Transform the old anchor store spaces into mixed-use areas with apartments, offices, and ground-floor retail. Most importantly, we would prioritize diversity and inclusion in our tenant selection, actively seeking out businesses owned by women, people of color, immigrants, and other underrepresented groups. The mall would become a showcase for the kind of entrepreneurial spirit that corporate America often overlooked. The financing was complex, involving a combination of traditional loans, community development funds, and impact investment capital. I had to prove that my vision wasn't just socially conscious, but economically viable. That meant detailed market analysis, financial projections, and feasibility studies, but the most challenging part was convincing the seller that a woman who had been fired from a mall job 3 years earlier was capable of buying and transforming their entire property. "Ms. Chen," said the lead negotiator for the parent company, a stern-faced man in his 60s who clearly doubted that someone who looked like me could be a serious buyer, "this is a substantial investment. Are you certain you have the experience and resources to undertake a project of this magnitude?" I smiled politely and slid a leather portfolio across the conference table. "Mr. Harrison, I believe my track record speaks for itself. Chen Boutique has been profitable every quarter since opening, with year-over-year growth of 340%. Our customer retention rate is 89%, and our community engagement metrics exceed industry standards by 200%. But more importantly, I know this property intimately. I know its strengths, its weaknesses, and its untapped potential." The room was silent as he flipped through the documents: financial statements, architectural renderings, tenant commitment letters, community impact studies. When he looked up, his expression had changed from skepticism to interest. "These projections are ambitious." "They're also conservative," I replied. "I've built my estimates on proven models from similar transformations in Detroit, Baltimore, and Portland. The demand for community-centered retail spaces is growing faster than supply, especially in areas with diverse populations and strong local economies." 6 months later, the sale was finalized. The local business journal ran a front-page story about the acquisition. Former mall employee returns as owner, plans major transformation. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all me, but the real work was just beginning. The renovation took 18 months and cost significantly more than projected, as these projects always do. We gutted most of the interior, preserving the best architectural elements, while creating open, flexible spaces that could adapt to changing needs. We installed state of the art technology infrastructure, energy efficient systems, and accessibility features that exceeded current requirements. The tenant selection process was like curating an art exhibition. Every business had to fit our vision of community centered commerce, but they also had to be financially viable and operationally sound. I personally interviewed hundreds of applicants, looking for entrepreneurs who shared our values of authenticity, quality, and social responsibility. We kept some traditional retail stores, but they were carefully chosen for their commitment to ethical practices and community engagement. The jewelry store was now owned by a collective of local artisans. The coffee shop was a fair trade cooperative run by refugees from 3 different countries. The bookstore specialized in works by local and diverse authors, with a cafe featuring pastries from my parents' restaurant. The old Luxe Boutique space became a rotating showcase for emerging fashion designers. With different featured designers every month, the old department store anchor was transformed into a mixed-use space with loft apartments upstairs and flexible retail and event space on the ground floor. But the crown jewel was the central court, which we converted into a true community space. The fountain remained, but around it we created comfortable seating areas, a small performance stage, and exhibits showcasing local art and history. It became a place where families brought their children, where freelancers worked on their laptops, where community groups held meetings and cultural celebrations. The grand reopening was scheduled for a Saturday in late spring, exactly 4 years after I had been escorted from this same building in disgrace. The local media coverage was extensive. Business journals, lifestyle magazines, the arts and culture blogs that had become the new tastemakers for urban retail. But the story that meant the most to me ran in the community newspaper, written by the same immigrant journalist who had covered my parents' restaurant opening 20 years earlier. From rejection to redemption, how Sarah Chen transformed personal pain into community prosperity, read the headline. The article traced my journey from mall employee to mall owner, but more importantly, it highlighted the dozens of small businesses and hundreds of jobs that the transformation had created. The night before the reopening, I walked through the empty corridors one last time, remembering the woman who had been escorted out of this building 4 years earlier. She had been broken but not defeated, humiliated but not destroyed, dismissed but not forgotten. The opening day exceeded every projection. Thousands of people toured the space, shopped at the stores, ate at the restaurants, and participated in the cultural programming we had planned. Local politicians gave speeches about economic development and community revitalization. Business leaders who had once written me off now wanted to schedule meetings to discuss future projects. But the moment that made everything worthwhile came when I spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Johnson, the security guard who had escorted me out 4 years earlier, was standing near the central court with his wife and teenage daughter, looking around in amazement. He approached me hesitantly, clearly recognizing me but unsure how to navigate this role reversal. "Ms. Chen," he said quietly, "I just wanted to say, this place is incredible, and I wanted to apologize for, well, you know, that day. It never sat right with me." His daughter looked confused, but his wife nodded knowingly. She had probably heard the story many times over the years. "There's nothing to apologize for, Johnson," I replied genuinely. "You were doing your job. How are things with you?" "Good, good. I'm actually working security for the new tech company downtown now. Better pay, better benefits." He paused, looking around at the bustling space. "I heard you're hiring here too. Good jobs, from what people are saying." "We are. And if you know anyone who might be interested, have them reach out. We believe in second chances here." As the day wound down and the crowds thinned out, I found myself standing in the same spot where Marcus Wellington had delivered my termination letter 4 years earlier. The marble floors were the same, but everything else had been transformed. Where once there had been sterile corporate perfection, now there was warmth, diversity, and authentic human energy. I thought about karma, about justice, about the long arc of redemption. The people who had betrayed and mocked me hadn't suffered some dramatic comeuppance straight out of a movie. Most of them had simply faded into the background noise of ordinary lives, facing ordinary consequences for ordinary choices. Marcus had found another corporate job in another city. Vanessa had opened a small boutique in the suburbs, struggling but surviving. The employees who had celebrated my downfall had moved on to other jobs, other gossip, other petty dramas. Their punishment, if it could be called that, was simply irrelevance. They had chosen to be small, and life had obliged by making their impact small as well. My victory wasn't in their defeat. It was in my own transformation. 4 years ago, I had been an assistant manager trying to prove I belonged in someone else's vision of success. Now I was a community leader, creating new definitions of what success could look like. The mall, my mall now, was buzzing with activity as vendors closed up their booths and families finished their dinners at the food hall. Children played around the fountain while their parents talked and laughed. Teenagers worked on art projects in the creative studios. Seniors attended a lecture on local history in the community room. This was what I had really been fighting for all along, though I hadn't understood it at the time. Not revenge against the people who had wronged me, but the chance to create something better. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Watch the news coverage. So proud of you. Dad says to tell you that mountains move for people who know how to wait." I smiled, remembering our conversation from years earlier about mountains being too high to climb alone. She had been right in a way. I hadn't climbed the mountain alone. I had brought an entire community with me. And together, we had built something that was more than any of us could have achieved individually. As I locked up the main entrance and walked to my car, a new hybrid SUV that reflected my values as much as my improved finances, I took one last look at the building that had been both my biggest failure and my greatest success. The sign above the entrance read, "Chen Community Marketplace," in elegant letters that honored both my heritage and my vision. Below it, in smaller text, was the motto that had guided every decision in the renovation: "Where everyone belongs." 4 years ago, they had told me I didn't belong here. Tonight, I was going home to the loft apartment I had built on the top floor of my own mall, overlooking the community I had helped create. Sometimes the best revenge is living well, but the best victory is creating a world where revenge becomes irrelevant because justice has already been served. As I drove through the parking lot, I noticed that most of the spaces were filled not with BMWs and Mercedes, but with Hondas and Toyotas, minivans and pickup trucks, the vehicles of working families, small business owners, and community members who saw this place as truly theirs. That was exactly the way I wanted it to be. 6 months later, the mall had exceeded every financial projection and was being studied as a model for community-centered retail development across the country. I had been invited to speak at conferences, consult on similar projects, and even write a book about the experience. But the morning that felt like true vindication came when I received an email from someone unexpected: Emma, the former coffee shop employee who had joined in mocking my departure years earlier. "Hi, Sarah," the email began. "I hope you remember me from the old mall. I've been following what you've done with the space, and I wanted to reach out for 2 reasons. First, to apologize for how I acted when you were fired. I was young and stupid and scared about my own job security, but that's no excuse for joining in when people were saying cruel things about you. You deserved better from all of us. Second, I'm writing because I've been working on starting my own catering business, and I wondered if you might have any advice or opportunities at the marketplace. I understand if you'd rather not respond, but I had to try. What you've built there is exactly the kind of place I wish I could be part of." I stared at the email for a long time, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to delete it, to let her live with the consequences of her choices. Part of me wanted to write back with a detailed account of how much her cruelty had hurt. Instead, I did something that surprised even myself. I picked up the phone and called her. "Emma, this is Sarah Chen. I got your email." There was a long pause, then a shaky breath. "Oh my God, I can't believe you called. I was sure you'd just ignore me." "I thought about it," I said honestly, "but that's not who I want to be. Tell me about your catering business." We talked for 30 minutes about her plans, her challenges, her dreams of combining her love of cooking with her business degree. Her ideas were solid, her passion was genuine, and her remorse seemed sincere. 2 weeks later, Emma's Ethical Eats opened a small storefront in the marketplace, specializing in locally sourced, culturally diverse catering and prepared meals. She hired 3 employees within the first month, all of them from underrepresented communities. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, she pulled me aside. "You didn't have to give me this chance. After what I did, what we all did. Why?" I thought about the question, about the journey that had brought me to this moment. Because holding on to anger would have made me smaller, not stronger. And because the whole point of this place is to prove that everyone deserves a second chance to show who they really are. That evening, I sat in my office overlooking the main corridor of the marketplace, watching the early dinner crowd and the after-work shoppers browse the stores and gather in the community spaces. My parents were having dinner at their restaurant's new location in the food hall, their faces glowing with pride as they served customers who had come specifically to support their business. I opened my laptop and began typing the final chapter of the book I was writing about the experience. The publisher wanted me to focus on the business lessons, the financial strategies, the market analysis that had made the project successful. But the real story, I had come to understand, wasn't about revenge or even about triumph over adversity. It was about the choice to transform pain into purpose, to respond to exclusion by creating inclusion, to answer cruelty with compassion. 4 years earlier, they had mocked me as an embarrassment and escorted me out of their mall like a criminal. They had been wrong about me, but more importantly, I had been wrong about what victory would look like. I had imagined that success would feel like vindication, like proving them wrong, like watching them suffer the consequences of their choices. Instead, it felt like coming home to a place I had built not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. The mall was full of laughter and conversation, children playing and teenagers working on projects, seniors sharing stories and young entrepreneurs chasing dreams. This was my legacy, not the defeat of my enemies, but the creation of a community where such enemies could become irrelevant through the simple power of belonging. Sometimes karma doesn't strike like lightning. Sometimes it grows slowly, quietly, like seeds planted in rich soil, nurtured by patience and watered by persistence. Sometimes the best revenge is building something so beautiful, so successful, so meaningful that the people who hurt you become footnotes in a much larger story. As I finished writing and prepared to head home to my apartment upstairs, I took one last look at the thriving community below. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that dignity and determination could overcome any obstacle. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, in the place I had built, from the ashes of my lowest moment, surrounded by the community that had grown from the seeds of my greatest pain. They had mocked me as an embarrassment. Karma had made me the owner of their mall, and I had turned that ownership into something none of us had imagined possible, a place where everyone could own a piece of the dream.